Hello and welcome to the Guru Is You podcast. I'm your host, Laura Wall. This podcast is all about people who found unconventional methods to heal themselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Their stories contain a little bit of mystery, maybe some magic, and even miracles. And they're here to inspire you to remember you are more than your body. You are more than your mind. You are the guru, and the guru is you. Today's guest is the author of 12 books of poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction. Her most recent book, The Change Room, is a novel about sexual exploration and marriage. Check out the show notes for a link. She's also an educator and trauma counselor in private practice in Canada. Join me in welcoming Karen Connelly.
So Karen, I know that you had a startling experience that was transformative for you. Can you share with our listeners, take us back to that time where things changed?
Yes. So it was April Fool's Day, 2017. About 10 days before I was going to publish my most recent book. So I was in an excited state and things were going well, ostensibly well. And I came downstairs early that morning. It was a Saturday, it was a Saturday. And it was very early. It was like 5:30 or 6, and nobody was up yet. So came down the stairs, went into the kitchen, and very unexpectedly, my young son jumped out of a hiding place to scare me. And he really, really did scare me. I had no idea that he was hiding downstairs waiting for me. And, it was an April Fool's joke, but for me, it was terrifying. And the experience of being frightened, viscerally, physically frightened like that, first thing in the morning in a dark house, sent me back into a state of very, very violent PTSD abreaction. So I started re-experiencing sexual assault from my childhood. And it was terrifying. And for your listeners who know what it's like to re-experience a traumatic event, part of you usually knows that you're still here, but most of you has actually switched into the past, has gone into the past and is literally re-experiencing what for me was, when I was a small child, a very dramatic, terrifying, life-threatening event. So I was hyperventilating and crying and just wild-eyed and didn't know what had happened and was frightened. And my poor son, he was about 8 or 9 at that time, and he was so apologetic, and he went and got me a glass of water and a wet face cloth, and he was saying, "I'm so sorry, Mom, I didn't mean to scare you." And so those things actually really did help me come back into the present, because again, any sort of physical grounding tool or object or sensation can be very helpful to us when we're experiencing PTSD triggers or re-experiencing violence from the past. So that was helpful, but it was very, very shaking nonetheless. It was very frightening. And I hadn't had a PTSD abreaction like that for quite a few years. And it had been many years since I had one that was so violent, that was so complete. Like I was re-experiencing being physically assaulted as a child. So I was very shaken. And in fact, later that morning, my husband came down and he was like, once he had learned what had happened, he said, "Wow, I hope this isn't the beginning of like, a difficult period for you." I was like, "Yeah, I hope not too." And they were very prophetic words, because it was the beginning of a huge reordering of my life. And it continued the next day. I went to see some girlfriends for a brunch, and It was partly to celebrate my new book coming out. I was very excited. I wasn't feeling very good, but I didn't want to change my plans because of what had happened. And in a way, I'm glad that I didn't now, because during that brunch, um, my friends were so unkind and so unresponsive. Even when they learned that I was sort of struggling with some, I told them eventually, because I was in a not in a good state. I told them that I was really struggling with something that had happened that morning, like this PTSD abreaction. Um, but even before that, none of them brought up the fact that I was having a book coming out. I thought that the brunch.
But that was the reason for the brunch, was to celebrate you, and they kind of missed that.
Well, all they talked about was their own project. I just experienced strange jealousy, and some of it was PTSD. I also experienced erasure and not being seen or heard. So I understood in retrospect that, of course, my sensitivity had a lot to do with what had happened the day before.
Sure.
But that afternoon, one of the women who had left the brunch a bit early before I talked about my struggle, she called me because obviously one of the other friends had told her what had gone on, and she started to interrogate me about what had happened. So why I was upset, what had happened the day before. She actually is a journalist, so she began to interview me, and
without your
this
permission.
Without my permission. And I was actually, when she phoned, I was in bed and I was crying, and I told her that I was in bed and crying, and I really couldn't talk to her about it right now because I was too upset. And she wouldn't stop. She kept asking. She kept demanding that I tell her what had happened. And I did. And of course, I had another significant PTSD abreaction and started to cry, and again kind of re-experience, because somebody was forcing me to do something. And I had said no many times, and she just kept in her, I know her, so I knew that this was coming from her anxious journalistic place, but she also was just not respecting my body, my mind, my spirit. And it was so brutalizing because I was so sensitive. So we got off the phone after I started crying. She was like, okay, well, I hope you feel better soon. Bye. Again, people don't know how to behave.
Just a little Band-Aid on a gushing arterial wound. Got it.
Yeah. And I was so mystified and so hurt that I didn't, initially I just didn't speak to this small group of people for a while. They came to my book launch. I told them that, I really had to kind of take a step back because I was doing this interior work about my own childhood. But really, the truth was that I had been so disappointed and surprised by the lack of compassion, tenderness, even just basic kindness that these people who were my supposedly close friends could offer. Like, none of them, in the days following, none of them were very forthcoming around, just calling me to check in with me. One of them wrote me an email and said I really should do some more self-care. And that's a quote from her email. And that was about all she said in the email. The other one said, I had to try not to be so jealous of people's friendships, and none of them realized that I was so upset. That's why they were busily talking about their own stuff. And like, it was just, again, now that I've gone through a process of actually becoming a therapist, I understand all the defense mechanisms, and I understand that they didn't have the equipment really to be kinder, to be more compassionate. 9
But in the
months.
moment, you were not once again getting your basic needs met. You were not safe. You were not protected. So, to me, it's almost like you were continuously wounded, like from your PTSD, and then also from all of those interactions.
Yeah. It was a very, very damaging 48 hours. But it revealed to me, it just lay bare the structure and the nature of the friendship that I had with that little tribe of women. I was often the caretaker. I was often the person that they called when they were upset, when their husband was having an affair, when their kids got in trouble, when they were in crisis. And I kind of started going through these things in my mind, when they needed help with, their book or their project, or like I had often been there for them. So that was one of the other realizations was, wow, I was in a desperate situation. I was really unorganized and really, really wounded. And it was pretty obvious. I mean, it became obvious the day of the brunch. I started crying. I didn't start throwing plates or screaming, but I was weeping and I was hurt, and I told them about it.
And you were
And I
giving them collectively as a friend group the things that you were wanting back from them. And on that day, that day, you did not get any of those, the day that you really needed it.
Yeah. And I just understood that, however those friendships had begun, whatever our love and connections were in the past, we had collectively gone through some kind of some kind of evolution where I was playing a role and they were playing roles, and the love was not really active anymore. And I was very surprised, because in my own healing, my earlier healing in my life from sexual trauma and incest and my very dysfunctional family, I had often looked at my relationships with men and understood how dysfunctional they were, and understood that because I've been abused by my father and grown up in, a very dysfunctional household, my romantic relationships were often very dysfunctional. And so I had done therapy and taken care of that and married a lovely human, and, felt very good about that. But I realized that those patterns from my early childhood, the parentification, the caretaking of others, the compulsive caretaking, the being the one that people could always rely on. I had just, participated in friendships that were often that way. So there was a period of 9 months when I just really turned these things over in my mind, and kind of had taken a step back from those friendships and not gotten, I just wasn't communicating with them very much. And then I decided, because she kept bugging me, she was like, why? The woman who had interrogated me while I was, sobbing, she asked numerous times to kind of explain why I'd taken this distance. And so at the same time, one of the other women wrote me an email about how much she disliked my new novel.
Wow. These people were really helpful in your process.
And this was just before I was supposed to have a big heart-to-heart with my interrogator. I received this email, and I was like, wow, it's a sign from the goddess. The gods and the goddesses are just telling me what, these people reveal themselves to us, right? People, we like to think that people are always hiding, but often people reveal who they are. And
in the moment of crisis. Yeah, absolutely.
In the moment of crisis, or in the moment where you really need them. The novel in question is called The Change Room, and it's about a woman who's married to a man who has a passionate affair with another woman. And it's a celebratory book about women who transgress sexually and morally, and nobody dies in the end. Nobody even gets divorced. The people find ways to love and connect with each other and eventually be honest with each other. And my friend who wrote me just a scathing email was angry because I was, she's gay, and I, as a woman who was married to a man, shouldn't have written such a such a dalliance and appropriated, the lesbian body. So I received that email, and I was supposed to have a conversation with my friend, the other bitch.
Yeah, this is a grown-up show. We can use all the words here.
And I thought, I don't want to talk to these people anymore. They're just mean. And I'm still hurting from what happened. So I wrote her an email and I said, this is why. In fact, and I sent it to all of them. I said, this is why, because you interrogated me when I was in the middle of a PTSD reaction and practically vomiting with sorrow, and you wouldn't stop. And guess what? She wrote me back almost immediately to say that I was lying, that I had misremembered our conversation. And I thought, wow,
Oh, Karen.
this is just like an abuser. This is what the abusers do most of the time. And I went through this with my father. Many of your listeners will have experienced all kinds of betrayals. And when you bring up the betrayal and you're honest about your pain in the betrayal, the person will often deny that it has even happened. So that was truly the end. Like, I was actually thinking up till that point that I would find a way to manage this. I would find a way to fit it within my life and my relationships with these women. And I would find a way to fix it, because that's what I used to do as a child. That's what I've done my whole life, is fix things. And I didn't, of course, because how could you really? It was unfixable. So it was
that was a huge moment to have that realization. And I appreciate you going backwards a little bit and kind of describing some of the things that happened to get you to this place, not only what happened with your father, but some of the signs or symptoms, if you will, that you started to see that paralleled that experience, that were showing up in your non-male relationships, that were showing up in your female friendships. And so you started to kind of see that, oh, I'm still doing the same thing. Let me try to resolve it. And then once again, you saw you were doing the same thing. So how did you turn that around? What was it that you found that started to help you heal from that and not have terrible friends?
Learn how to make better friends, right?
How did you find good friends?
Yeah, no, well, it's a big question for all of us. How do we find good friends? How do we make good friends, and how do we take care of our friendships? Because they're some of our most intimate relationships. And I had thought I was still very much in an abused child mind that these were still good friendships. I think they were good friendships in the early years, but they changed, as all relationships do, right? We go through changes. And I decided, I recognized that I still had a lot of healing to do from the patterns of my childhood as much as from the PTSD itself. And I had worked with a brilliant therapist when I was in my late 20s, the creator of a therapy called Observed and Experiential Integration. And it's a therapy that is similar in some ways to EMDR. So it's eye-based, body-based, breath-based, a somatic trauma therapy. And I had some sessions with her. I did some more OEI, and I remembered that when I had been young, I had told Audrey, one of the creators of this therapeutic modality, that I really wanted to write about it because it's so extraordinary. I did a lot of healing in the next 6 to 8 months, and I made the decision to embark on a new career of working with OEI, becoming an OEI trauma therapist. So that's what I did. And it really has, yeah, it's changed my life as it changed my life 20 years ago when I first experienced it as a client. But also just deciding to really face my own history in a new and different way now that I'm in the middle of my life. I'm 52. To really, really look at it. So I started to take much better care of my body. I really healed my marriage. There were a lot of things in my marriage that weren't going very well, and I faced those things and started working on my relationship with my husband more honestly. And yeah, just started training as a psychotherapist. So I'm in clinical practicum right now, and it's in one institute. And on the side, for the past 3 years, I've been training in observed and experiential integration, OEI therapy, which is a really incredible trauma therapy. Very simple, very direct. Um, and, I've learned this new language. I'm a big language learner. I love learning languages. So I've learned the language of psychodynamic psychotherapy. And of course, as a writer, that's going to inform my writing. That will change and influence my writing as well.
And you said that part of your process in doing this was not only doing the therapy, learning and becoming a therapist and working with others, but writing. Speak a little bit more about the healing process for you with writing.
Well, as many of us know, when we write our stories down, we 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 own them in a different way, and we also bring in imagination and other possibilities, and we can experience our own stories in a slightly different way. So there's a process of recognizing our story, but also changing our story. And in fact, there's a whole branch of therapy called narrative therapy that I work with a little bit too as a clinician, as a practitioner. Um, and yeah, I feel like I can finally write the story of my childhood now that I've done this this process, not just of becoming a therapist, but actually that more interior process of really, really facing my childhood wounds and looking at my present relationships more honestly and not just playing a role in relationship, but really fully inhabiting relationship and expecting that, asking that of the people who are in my life as well.
So I'm hoping that includes new friendships.
Yeah, it does.
You got rid of the mean girls.
I did. I did. I feel affection for them still. It
Sure.
was very hard. I was extremely wounded, angry. I felt vengeful. I felt all the things. But but in the past few months, I feel much more integrated about what happened. They were also acting out of their woundedness, out of their lack, out of the things that never were properly properly integrated, properly taken care of in them when they were young. So training as a therapist also really helped me understand that and become a little less personal about what happened. They didn't have the equipment to
Mm-hmm.
to take care of somebody who was in such a state. And none of them, except for the woman who wrote to me to say that I was lying, the other women never responded to my letter, my very heartfelt, loving letter. It wasn't accusatory or angry. It was just saying what had happened and how hurt I had been. But they couldn't respond. So when someone can't respond, you know that that's also a wound. We have to learn to respond to each other with kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can't, it's there's pain behind there somewhere, right?
I think and I speak from, you're Canadian, I'm US, I speak from the American experience. I feel like the full range of emotions is scary to people. And there are some that have been taboo for so long. There are no systems in place. There's old systems in place that don't work really well. But let's say, for example, grief or sorrow, when it comes up, most people, it makes them feel uncomfortable. And they don't, like you said, they're not equipped. They don't have the words. They don't know how to support. So by default, they do something else. Let's create a distraction. Let's talk about our own project. Let's hail the waiter, get some more wine at the table. Let's move on from this. So like you said, most people, it's not that they don't believe in grief or don't believe in anger or don't believe in sorrow. It's like you said, they don't have a way to interact with it because they don't have the tools. They just haven't.
Yeah.
And that's part of what the work that we're doing here, and I include myself in this, is teaching people more about their emotions and how to acknowledge them and how to interact with others, and again, with kindness. I would love to hear from you, Karen, about, after all of this and all the work that you've done and the beautiful books you've written, what would you say is your definition of healing?
That's a beautiful question. My definition of healing, it comes from all the parts of me. So it comes from myself as a writer, it comes from myself as a therapist, it comes from myself as a person who has PTSD and, pretty traumatic childhood history. It comes from my child. It comes from myself, like comes from my child self. And that is that healing is that we get to be all the parts. We get to bring all the parts together. So healing is integration, and it's being able to very gently, honestly hold all the parts together. So the PTSD piece, the language, the the failures of my marriage, which were often caused by me, by me not being able to truly be vulnerable and intimate because it was so terrifying, you know, anger issues, all those pieces, to just hold those and say, oh yes, this is all me. I am all of these things. I am not perfect, but I am bringing awareness to all of these different pieces. So that's what healing is. Awareness, compassion, empathy, self-empathy, kindness. It's not enough to just look at it and go, oh yeah, that's it. we have to, again, we have to, as you say, we have to bring that range of emotion and being able to feel emotion, hold our emotions, and regulate, go into the body and be able to hold these things, know how to calm our nervous systems down, how to live in relationship. And that absolutely includes the earth, to live in relation to the earth. We live in relationship with ourselves, with other people, with other life forms, with the planet. It's not easy. It's the work of a lifetime.
It is the work of a lifetime. So are there any special words that you would have for our listeners and viewers out there? Maybe they're going through a struggle where they can identify with yours. Maybe it's PTSD or something similar, or maybe they've just encountered a group of mean girls, and they're trying to heal some part of them, whether it's heart or body or mind or spirit. What would you like to share with them?
So we can go back to that idea of what, how do we bring our stories in a way that we can hear them? Like, how do you bring all those struggles, whatever struggle it might be, whatever difficult story you're wrestling with? How do you listen to yourself? What do you bring when you hear yourself thinking about something that's hard or something you can't do or something you feel is a failure, you know, just bring love and compassion and some tenderness to whatever is happening. Even if it's like really ugly feelings, like I felt ugly feelings towards those women, vengeful, angry. I wanted to hurt them, all the child feelings. And I just kept saying, okay, feel that, and then just compassion, keep your heart open, just feel what is there, but then also bring love to yourself, bring love to your own experience.
Mm. I think that's a lovely place to end it. So thank you so much. I know our listeners are going to enjoy.
If you have come this far, I want to thank you so much for the gift of your attention. To hear more amazing healing stories, please subscribe. This podcast has been brought to you by the Hearts of Healing Center. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to bringing more light, love, healing, and hope by freely offering holistic healing services to our local and global community. To learn more about us and to see more details from today's episode, be sure to check out the show notes. And don't forget, you are more than your body. You are more than your mind. You are the guru. And the guru is you.